Hi, it's Raisa Shafira Affandi here. Today, we're exploring free verse. Is it really free? We'll find out how poets bend or break the rules while still creating structure. Let's dive in. Our learning objectives for this module are 1. To understand the characteristics of free verse and its differences with classic poetry forms, and 2. To gain an awareness of how free verse still employs rhythm and structure. What is free verse? The poetry forms we've discussed so far have all had a specific structure, whether their rhyme scheme, their rhythm scheme, their number of lines, their number of syllables per line, and so on. In contrast, free verse does not follow such strict rules. The poet is free to use any rhythm, syllables per line, and rhyme scheme, or lack thereof. Usually, the rhythm follows everyday speech, and the topic relates to everyday experiences. Let's look at some examples of free verse. As you can see here, neither of these poems follows a strict meter or rhyme scheme. Lots of free verse doesn't rhyme at all. For example, Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things, feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness, how you ride and ride thinking the bus will never stop, the passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. And Therapy by Audre Lorde. Trying to see you, my eyes grow confused. It is not your face they are seeking, fingering through your spaces like a hungry child. Even now, I do not want to make a poem. I want to make you more and less a part from myself. So, very different from the classic forms that we've read aloud before. Now, in free verse, you can sort of break the rules of verse altogether. You don't have to start each line in the same place. You can start it anywhere on the page. And you can even use footnotes like this poem on the right, with most of the poem in those footnotes being separated by a dash that signifies line breaks instead of an actual line break. One stanza for one footnote. On the left, you can also see that the last stanza, each spoke, is formatted very differently from the ones before. The poet puts the word spoke very far from the beginning of the lines for the other parts of the poem. So, because it's so free and unstructured, can anything be free verse? Now, we have to remember what poetry is from the beginning of this course, as long as it follows the structure of lines and stanzas instead of paragraphs, for example. It is technically poetry. But does that mean you can write anything, add line breaks, and call it poetry? The short answer is yes. Now, the long answer is that there is more to poetry than just line breaks and stanzas. Remember the definitions again from the beginning of this course. Poetry thinks very carefully about every single word, its meaning and sound, and its placement and order. So it's much more condensed than prose. There's also imagery, juxtaposition, shape, symbolism, and all the things we've discussed previously in this course. A rich poem can give the reader an intense experience. We'll still consider these aspects. Now, additionally, just because there are no strict rhythm or meter rules, it doesn't mean that free verse poems don't have rhythm. It's just that the rhythm is irregular or doesn't follow any existing poetry forms. So how do the line breaks and short lines affect the rhythm of this poem, for example? So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. You can see that in this poem, there's still a sort of pattern going on. The first line of each stanza has 3 words, and the second line always has 1 word. You can think about how this affects the rhythm of the poem. Now let's look at free verse versus prose for a little bit more of an elaboration of the difference between the two. You can see here in this Tumblr post on the left which is not at all intended to be a poem, but just a rant by somebody, that it does follow the general structure of free verse with lines and stanzas, even if they were meant to be paragraphs. I'll read it out for you. I hate it when I can't even write a poem about something because it's too obvious. Like in the Airbnb I was at, I guess it used to be a kid's room because you could see the imprint of one little glow-in-the-dark star that had been missed and painted over in landlord white. Like, that's the poem already. What's the point? You get it. You get the themes. I don't have time to do it justice. Just look at it. It's on the ceiling. Now, the Tumblr post on the right is a response to the one on the left, and it's all the same, except the poster blots part of it out to make a poem. Now it reads, write a poem about something too obvious, like a room, one little glow-in-the-dark star, painted over. That's the poem, the point. You get to do it justice. Just look. So you can see here the difference between prose and poetry is that poetry is much more scarce and careful and deliberate with its word choice, keeping things down to their bare essentials, even if it doesn't rhyme, and perhaps leaving some things unexplained for the reader so that you can define your own meaning. That's why poetry is about feelings, the reader's feelings and the poet's feelings, not just the ideas or concepts in the text. Now, is free verse really free if it still has to use rhythm and so on? If poetry still pays attention to rhythm, rhyme, form, and poetic devices, is it really free? Let's see what the poets think. Lots of people have debated about this. So Charles Allen said, the only freedom free verse obtains is a limited freedom from the tight demands of the metered line. Poet T.S. Eliot wrote, no verse is free for the man who wants to do a good job. William Carlos Williams said, being an art form, a verse cannot be free in the sense of having no limitations or guiding principles. And poet and critic Ivor Winters said, the greatest fluidity of statement is possible where the greatest clarity of form prevails. The free verse that is really verse is, in its peculiar fashion, the antithesis of free. So you can see generally, these poets think, no, there's no such thing as just doing whatever you want and calling it poetry. But at the same time, let's look at these examples of free verse to elaborate a bit more. You can take a look at both these poems and see how they make you feel. What kind of experience do they give you? On the left, we have Rupi Kaur. I get so lost in where I want to go, I forget that the place I'm in is already quite magical. On the right, we have Torso of Air by Ocean Vuong. Suppose you do change your life, and the body is more than a portion of night sealed with bruises. Suppose you woke and found your shadow replaced by a black wolf, the boy, beautiful and gone. So you take the knife to the wall instead. You carve and carve until a coin of light appears, and you get to look in at last on happiness, the eyes staring back from the other side, waiting. Now, some people are turned off by very complex ideas and unclear meanings, and they may get more emotionally from more accessible reading. Meanwhile, other people may get more from a poem when it is more complex. Different people will also find epiphanies or wonder or joy or any reaction in different things. In the end, what really matters is not what is called a poem by experts or critics or other people. What matters is how the poem enriches your own life experience. That's what can give it personal value. So let's review what we've learned. Free verse is poetry that does not follow any strict rhythm or rhyme rules. However, they will still pay attention to the details of language and other elements of poetry, such as the poetic devices we've discussed previously. They may also still use rhythm and rhyme, just not in the format of traditional poetry forms. Now, anything can be free verse if it's in the structure of lines and stanzas, but whether it is quote-unquote good or not provides a rich reading experience depends on other techniques the poem may use. That's it for this session. Freedom in poetry often comes with its own hidden patterns. See you in the next module.